At 19 years old, I witnessed a murder. The killer saw me. He came for me, intending to silence the only witness. In those final terrifying moments with his hands around my throat, I spoke a single sentence. That sentence saved my life. Years later, when the killer was finally apprehended, journalists swarmed, tracking my every move like sharks scenting blood. It was only then, looking back, that I suddenly realized the words that saved me that horrific night were a prophecy. The capture of the notorious serial killer, Calvin Thorne, was met with a chilling calm from the man himself. He confessed, systematically detailing the crimes he could still remember, implying a terrifying scale of depravity that extended beyond his own recollection. His actions were described as monstrous, devoid of any humanity. He claimed that as long as the time and place felt right, and the urge to kill seized him, he would act without fail. With one solitary exception. That exception occurred on New Year's Eve, 1998. He claimed he spared a girl, just 19 years old at the time. Now 18 years later, that girl was me. I am Serafina Hayes, an unremarkable artist, teaching at a regional art academy. My life had been quiet, teaching, painting, occasionally holding a small exhibition. My nature is solitary, sensitive, prone to anxiety, and I genuinely detest being the focus of attention. Until Calvin Thorne's arrest thrust me into an unwelcome spotlight. When he confessed to that one instance of mercy, Thorne offered only vague reasons. It was New Year's Eve, he'd mumbled to the police. I just didn't feel like it. But he knew, and I knew, those weren't the real reasons he let me live. He had simply stated the bare minimum, enough to satisfy the initial line of questioning from the police. Once the death sentence was certain, he saw no need for further explanation. But the media smelled blood. Like a pack of hungry wolves, journalists descended, chasing the story of the serial killer's single act of clemency. The rumors intensified after Thorne's execution, whispers pointing towards me, Serafina Hayes, the art teacher. It was clear to anyone with a modicum of sense. A psychopath like Thorne, a man who murdered without remorse, wouldn't spare a witness who could expose his crimes just because it was a holiday, or he suddenly didn't feel like it. There had to be another, deeper reason. That reason, the true story of that terrifying New Year's Eve, was known only to Calvin Thorne and me. As his hands closed around my throat, squeezing the life from me, I used the last of my strength, the last of my breath, to speak. I said one sentence. And then he let me go. I had faced death and somehow cheated it. Please, you have to tell me, what exactly happened that night? Of all the journalists, the most relentless, the one who pursued me the longest, was Daniel Sterling. He was tenacious, a tabloid reporter with the single-minded focus of a bloodhound on a scent. He seemed to view this interview as his life's magnum opus. It was a terrible experience. I would tell him, my voice tight with suppressed fear. I don't want to relive it. I can't. For over a month, I turned him away countless times. Ms. Hayes, he pleaded, just tell me the truth. I'll do anything. I couldn't deny his persistence was affecting, but my reluctance wasn't mere unwillingness. It was terror. I was afraid that dredging up the past, speaking the words I had spoken, would unleash something I couldn't control. Then one day my assistant called. That journalist, Daniel Sterling. He saw your exhibition today. My assistant described Daniel's reaction to one painting in particular, my famous debut piece, Goddess. I listened, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. As the assistant finished, I gave a silent, knowing smile. So that was it. That was why. Knock, knock, knock. A moment later, as if on cue, Daniel Sterling knocked on my studio door. He entered, his face alight with anticipation, but before he could even speak, I gestured for him to sit, offering a welcoming smile I didn't feel. I've decided to accept your interview, I announced, watching his expression shift from anticipation to startled disbelief. He seemed momentarily speechless, fumbling for his notepad and pen. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. That New Year's Eve, I began, my voice low, my gaze distant. I was 19 years old, and I narrowly escaped death. Calvin Thorne's hands were around my throat, and I spoke a sentence. Prophecy. And he let me go. I paused, picking up the kettle, pouring 2 cups of water. At the time, I didn't understand it was a prophecy. It was only now 18 years later, after his capture and execution, that I suddenly realized the time had come for that prediction to be fulfilled. I forced the words out, each one feeling heavy, laden with dark significance. Let's start from the beginning, I sighed, offering him a cup. Please have some water. He was cautious, watching me drink first before taking a hesitant sip of his own. The interview began formally. Daniel provided a summary of Thorne's case. Calvin Thorne, the serial killer. Over a dozen victims throughout the years, all women starting in the late 80s. All indiscriminate killings. He spoke factually, clinically. Naturally, the specific details of his confessions aren't released to the public. It was only after his execution that the rumors about his single act of mercy began to spread, eventually leading investigators and the media to you, Ms. Hayes. Yes, I confirmed. Thorne claimed he spared you because it was New Year's and he suddenly didn't feel like killing. That's obviously unlikely. Why do you say that? I prompted, though I already knew his likely reasoning. We investigated Thorne's childhood, Daniel explained, his voice grim. His father died young. He and his mother were very close. Then they were both kidnapped. His mother's family was poor, couldn't pay the ransom. His mother was killed. He was left alone, just a child, sent away to work in another province. Psychopathic killers often have such tragic backgrounds. I recalled Thorne's own words to me that night. He told me about that, I said quietly. Daniel leaned forward, alert. He told you? So he saw you as someone like him? Or did you already know each other? Neither. We didn't know each other. He killed indiscriminately. It was a chance encounter. I felt the need to clarify again, to distance myself from his crimes. I wasn't his accomplice. I've never done anything wrong. I brought the conversation back to his point. So you bring up his childhood. What does that mean? It means he had no home. And without a home, he wouldn't have any concept of New Year's in the way most Chinese people do. New Year's is deeply tied to family, to reunion, seeing others. Celebrating being together would likely have made him angrier, more extreme. So, it was New Year's as a reason for mercy. It's too normal for a man like him, which makes it suspicious. I nodded, acknowledging the painful truth of his words. I understand. No home, no New Year's. I know that feeling well. I'm an orphan, abandoned at birth. No home for me either. Daniel quickly apologized, and the air in the studio grew heavy with unspoken shared loss. He looked around the room, changing the subject. I saw your exhibition. No need for pleasantries, I said with a self-deprecating smile. I know my limitations. I'm not particularly talented. My debut piece, Goddess, is my best work. It was my peak. Everything I've painted since has been mediocre. But I truly liked it, Daniel insisted, his voice earnest. Looking at that painting, it reminded me of my mother. He paused, his gaze distant. That's why I came looking for you. It's not just about Calvin Thorne. I have a personal reason. The one titled Goddess? I asked, knowing the answer. How did you know? Goddess is my debut. My best work. Only in a state of extreme psychological intensity could I paint like that. Only Goddess was born from that state. The decades since have been a struggle, producing only ordinary art. I described the painting, the woman facing outward, her eyes sad yet longing, gazing up, her hand reaching out, expressing a deep yearning. Many critics loved it, I continued. They said the woman in the painting was both seductive and pure, that she evoked a primal need to protect her, making her the perfect lover. They said it was about passionate, burning love. But you seem to interpret it differently. It wasn't love, Daniel stated firmly, his voice unwavering. It was kinship, family. That painting isn't of a lover. It's of a mother. She's not gazing up passionately. She's looking down with pity. Her hand isn't reaching up. It's reaching down. It's not yearning. It's not a desire for protection. It's offering protection. It's sacrifice. My heart began to pound, a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Faster and faster. So your interpretation is completely the opposite of everyone else's, I said, leaning forward. It's as if others viewed the woman in the painting from above, and you viewed her from below. What makes your perception so fundamentally different? Daniel's voice softened, filled with a quiet certainty. I couldn't possibly see the woman in that painting as a lover. Her face. It looks remarkably like my mother's. My mother, who I was separated from when I was 5. There's a strong possibility that you painted my mother. Your mother? Unbelievable. Could it really be such a coincidence? I asked, though a strange, cold premonition was already taking root in my mind. Daniel was silent for a moment, deep in thought. I can't be completely certain without knowing more, he said finally. I want to know who the model for that painting was, and if I can buy it. First, I said, my voice calm, transactional, tell me your story. He hesitated. This is a trade, Daniel. You want to understand Calvin Thorne from my perspective. I need to understand your mother from yours. Daniel composed himself, his journalist's instincts kicking in. Is that the real reason you agreed to the interview? Not entirely. You knew I visited your exhibition today? I found out tonight. My assistant called just before you arrived, telling me about your reaction, your desire to buy the painting, your interpretation of Goddess as your mother. You were the first to see her that way. I truly want to buy the painting, Daniel said quickly, perhaps sensing my skepticism. I held firm. Then please begin. Your story. Daniel recounted his childhood. A story steeped in the harsh realities of the 1990s economic reforms. I was born in the early 90s, he began, his voice soft, distant, recounting events from 20 years prior as if they happened yesterday. This happened when I was 5. My parents were factory workers. Our life wasn't rich, but it was happy. The layoffs came relentless, brutal. Our factory shut down. Both my parents were jobless. Suddenly, all our income vanished. Life became incredibly hard. We moved several times, each place smaller, darker, more depressing. There was never enough food. My mother tried selling flatbread on the street, but her stall was smashed. My father tried to go abroad for illegal work, following a relative, but he was cheated out of the travel money. He described the daily struggle for survival. My parents went to the wet market every day to pick through discarded vegetable scraps and meat trimmings. You had to be fast. There were so many laid-off families doing the same thing. Eating watery rice gruel around an empty table was normal. The house was always filled with the sound of my parents' sighs. His voice broke slightly. I was just a kid, but I wanted to help. I went with other children to catch fish in the river. I was so hungry my blood sugar dropped. I got dizzy, my vision blurred, and I fell headfirst into the water. I almost drowned. He paused, swallowing hard. After they pulled me out, I developed pneumonia. Our situation went from bad to worse. Daniel couldn't continue for a moment. Tears welled in his eyes. He was still young, in his 20s. His traumatic childhood, I realized, had forged the determined, almost obsessive personality he possessed now. I was much older, but I felt a strange kinship with his pain. I understand, I said softly. I lived through that chaotic time too. I waited. What happened then? Then, someone wanted to marry my mother, Daniel said, the words heavy with unspoken grief. For 500 yuan. My father let my mother go with that man. The man promised he would take good care of her, always. Daniel's voice was barely a whisper now. I was 5. So young. So many details are lost to me now. But the moment my mother turned back to look at me as she boarded the train, I will never forget that. Across the crowds of people, her eyes, they held that same look, that look of sad, pitying love, gazing at me from afar. And she reached out her hand, just like in your painting, but then she pulled it back, turned, and vanished into the dark opening of the train car. I screamed, crying, "Mommy!" My father held me back, wouldn't let me chase after her. That train pulled away. And it never came back. He rubbed at his eyes. When I was a child, I hated my mother. I didn't understand why she left me. As I grew older, I began to grasp the desperation. A few years later, my father died from working himself too hard. So you say, you're an orphan. I suppose I am too. The difference is, I knew a father's love, a mother's love for a time. Having had it, having lost it. That's a different kind of pain. It creates longing. It's very painful. Losing something and never having had it are different forms of suffering, I acknowledged, though my own void felt just as profound. I yearn for a mother's love, even if I've never known it. What happened after that? Daniel's story continued into his teenage years. When I was 15, I started showing a knack for journalism. I wrote well. I got a job writing for our local newspaper, even had a serialized novel published. I wrote relentlessly day and night and managed to earn over 500 yuan. After asking around for months, making countless inquiries, I finally found the man who had taken my mother. I wanted to bring her home. Daniel's voice grew heavy, laced with bitter memory. He took my 500 yuan. He dragged me around, making me eat meat, drink alcohol, wandering aimlessly. He just wouldn't tell me. Only after I had spent every last yuan did he finally tell me. He said. He kept my mother for a year. Then he sold her. He sold her to people who ran that kind of business, sex work. Daniel broke down, tears streaming down his face. You understand, don't you? I understand, I said quietly, my own voice tight with emotion. This, then, was why he saw a mother, not a lover, in my painting. This is why you saw a mother, not a lover, in the painting. Everyone else saw passionate desire. You saw desperate sacrifice. I pushed the water glass towards him. Don't cry, have some water. Daniel looked at me. His eyes filled with a profound sadness. I never saw my mother again after that. It's quite tragic, isn't it? I've been painting for decades, I replied, finding a strange parallel in our narratives of perceived failure. Mediocre work, mostly. Only Goddess stands out. I find that rather tragic. Everyone defines tragic differently, Daniel said, attempting to console me. I just wanted a complete family, for my mother not to suffer, for my father not to die. But time can't be reversed. Even if it could, there were no better choices. I don't want to remember anymore. My family wasn't complete either, but I don't define my life as tragic because of that, I mused. For me, the tragedy lies in my stagnant career. The inability to create something truly meaningful again. Not every artist becomes famous, Daniel offered gently. Painting works that satisfy yourself is enough, isn't it? Yes, I agreed, a flicker of my artistic obsession surfacing. I don't pursue fame. I want to paint one more piece that satisfies me, something like Goddess, to mark the end of my artistic career. Or perhaps, the moment I finish it, that will be the end of my career. I've wanted to paint a sequel to Goddess for years, but I could never make myself start. Daniel looked genuinely puzzled. You're not even 40. Why would your career end? Are you ill? No. It's just a painter who only produces good work at the very beginning and very end of their career. That seems quite tragic, doesn't it? But I can't help it. This is the most fulfillment I can achieve. I still don't fully understand. I spoke not directly to him, but to the idea that had haunted me for years. I want to paint the sequel to Goddess. To depict what the goddess in the painting sees. Or who she sees. Everyone says she's looking at a lover. If they see her as a lover, naturally she must be looking at a lover. But I couldn't paint it. Something felt wrong. I waited for someone who truly understood to give me guidance. I was fortunate. I waited for you, refusing your interviews before. That was my short-sightedness. Why do you believe my interpretation is the correct one? Daniel asked, his journalistic skepticism resurfacing. Because at the very least, we saw the painting from the same angle, I said softly, a chilling realization settling over me. The model for that painting, the woman, I was looking up at her. I was viewing her from below. Daniel still looked confused. What do you mean? From below? Literally. From below. She was above me and I was below her. Not the other way around as others assume. Which brings us back to the main topic of the interview. Calvin Thorne. Daniel's eyes widened, connecting the dots. This painting. It's related to Calvin Thorne? Yes. I nodded. If you look closely at the lower left corner, you'll see the creation date. It's the same year I encountered Calvin Thorne. 1998. It was what happened that New Year's Eve. Daniel's gaze dropped, his voice heavy with dread. I have a terrible feeling. Why? Thorne confessed. Many of his victims were sex workers. Women in that profession. Often no one cares what happens to them, no one looks for them. Their deaths can go unnoticed, uninvestigated. Daniel trailed off, his eyes flickering, his voice trembling with dawning horror. Yes, I said gently, confirming his suspicion, yet adding a small thread of doubt. I understand why you'd think of your mother's story. But in reality, the woman I saw might not have been her. The 90s were chaotic. Life was hard. There were many unfortunate women. Right. Yes. Let's get back to the interview. What happened after you encountered Calvin Thorne? I told him my story, the one I had kept hidden for 18 years. I had mentioned I was an orphan, abandoned at birth. The 90s, alongside the layoffs, saw a surge in abandoned infants. It was a grim reality, particularly for baby girls. Objectively, it was a societal trend. Subjectively, it was the start of my tragedy. My childhood had been difficult, marked by poor health, which in turn affected my mental state. It was a vicious cycle. Given the grim environment, surviving at all felt like a miracle. I wouldn't dwell on the specific hardships of my childhood, except to say that they shaped me. I grew up with an unhealthy psyche, seeing the world differently. But I had never done anything wrong. My only solace was painting. It was an escape. When I wasn't working odd jobs, I was painting. I lacked natural talent, relying solely on practice. My technical skill was decent, but it lacked a certain spark, a soul. I contacted an art professor once. He said if I could paint something truly moving, he would waive the tuition fees and let me study at the academy. It was a polite rejection, I understood, but it fueled my desperate desire to create. Later, I met a kind woman who ran a small convenience store. She was incredibly good to me. She let me work for her, paying me and letting me paint while I tended the store. One New Year, she and her husband went back to their hometown. Seeing me alone, they invited me to join them, but I declined. She insisted I stay at their place while they were gone. It was an apartment building, much nicer than where I usually stayed, with a landline phone, a luxury back then. The event happened on that New Year's Eve, 1998. I was alone in the shopkeeper's apartment, watching the Spring Festival gala. The atmosphere of forced cheer couldn't reach me. Restless, I set up my easel hoping to paint, but I was blank, staring at the empty canvas, unable to start. As midnight approached, the gala entered its countdown, 10, 9, 8. A new year was about to begin. Maybe things would get better. I saw snow falling outside the balcony window, and my spirits lifted slightly. I put on a coat and went out onto the balcony, reaching out my hand to catch the snowflakes. It was that simple action, reaching out to catch the snow, that sent everything spiraling out of control. White. 1 flake, 2 flakes. Black. 1 drop, 2 drops. I looked down at the dark, sticky liquid in my palm, confused. I brought my hand closer, smelling it. Sweet, metallic. Blood. Then, like a rusted, sluggish mechanism, I slowly, rigidly turned my neck, my gaze lifting. My entire body was leaning back against the iron railing. My eyes widened as I looked up at the apartment directly above mine. In that moment, the countdown reached 1. Happy New Year! Exploded from televisions, from radios. A chaotic roar rose from the streets as firecrackers began to crackle, and a single brilliant firework shot into the sky, bursting in a dazzling flash of light. In that sudden brightness, I saw clearly. Half a woman's body hung over the railing of the balcony directly above me. She was hanging downward, I was looking upward, and her face, tragic and newly dead, was directly opposite mine. She hung there, head down, staring at me, one arm extended downwards, lifelessly dangling, reaching towards me. Blood crawled over her arm, a dark, slow stream like a depleted winter creek, tracing a solemn path to her fingertips, dripping. My suppressed emotions, my psychological fragility, had reached their breaking point. I couldn't bear it. A scream tore from my throat. The sound was swallowed by the thunder of firecrackers, but the apartment above must have heard something. Almost as quickly as my scream began, the dripping hand was yanked back into the balcony. Someone was dragging the woman back up. And just as surely, that person would soon lean over the railing, looking down. Even a rusted, sluggish mechanism wound tight could store immense potential energy. In an instant, my scream stopped. I darted inside like a startled rabbit, moving with the speed and silence of a cat on a rooftop. Lights off, TV off, footsteps light on the floorboards. I did it all quickly, silently. Then I curled up by the sofa in the darkness, staring intently at the front door. The building had 6 floors, 8 apartments per floor. I was on the 3rd floor, 302. Above me, 402. The New Year's fireworks and firecrackers would muffle sound, making it hard for the killer to pinpoint where the scream came from, which floor, which apartment. If he came down to check, saw my apartment was dark, he might assume no one was home in 302, eliminating me as a witness. The hallway light outside came on, a faint glow seeping under the door. Then two shadows blocked the light beneath the door. A pair of feet stopped outside my apartment. They stood there for a long time, still, perhaps listening for movement inside. A minute passed. Then a knock. Slow, deliberate. Knock. 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 3 knocks, a pause, 3 knocks. Anyone home? Knock. 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 Something fell onto your balcony. Anyone home? A man's voice. Amused. Chilling. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. The knocking grew more frantic, beating against my eardrums, assaulting my already fragile nerves. I held my breath, rigid with fear. After another minute of this relentless knocking, the footsteps moved away. I exhaled a shaky breath. My first instinct should have been to call the police immediately. I had a phone in the apartment. But I didn't. I sat there, frozen. The image of the dead woman hanging from the balcony seared into my mind. I was terrified but also strangely exhilarated. The sight of her death had shocked me to the core. I desperately wanted to paint her. So I sat in front of my easel in the darkness, using the intermittent flashes of fireworks outside to see, and began to paint. About an hour later, I heard the sound of metal scraping, followed by a heavy thud. A chilling realization slammed into me. The killer. He was on the balcony. The balcony wasn't enclosed, just open railing. The door from the balcony into the apartment wasn't locked. The man from upstairs had jumped down onto my balcony. And now he was walking into the living room. The apartment was small. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to fight. I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot, sensing the cold presence moving closer. Then a hand clamped down on my throat. And then Daniel pressed, leaning forward, his voice tight with anticipation. I continued my story, my voice flat, detached, recalling the horror. "It's snowing," Thorne said, his voice raspy. "Snow on the railing. Except for the part you blocked." He laughed coldly, his hand tightening around my throat. That feeling, that crushing suffocation. It's still with me. "I understand," Daniel said, his eyes wide. He looked down from his balcony. "And the only section of your railing without snow was where you were leaning out, watching him. You rubbed the snow off." "Yes." He knew it was me. "So he came for me directly. And then? He was strangling you. In that moment, on the brink of death. What did you say?" My throat was closing, my vision blurring. But suddenly my mind became perfectly clear. "What did I say?" "You can't guess." I watched his expression, expecting him to make a connection. Daniel shook his head. "I can't. You said it was a prophecy." To be precise, I said 2 things. The first made him loosen his grip. The second made him let me go. The second was the prophecy. I can't imagine," Daniel admitted, frustration in his voice. I nodded slowly. "All right. You mentioned earlier that you see me as a clear-headed opportunist. I agree with the opportunist part, of course. But the clear-headed part, that's the key." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You can't be an opportunist in a vacuum, Daniel. Any transaction requires 2 parties. To benefit yourself, you often have to benefit someone else. Like this interview. I wanted your story, so I had to give you mine. Similarly, to prevent someone from harming you, you have to offer them something in return." The moment Thorne grabbed my throat, I realized it was a transaction for my life. He wanted to kill me. I had to make him understand that killing me came at a cost. Daniel looked thoughtful. "But you said you forgot to call the police. What cost could there be?" "Exactly," I said, a grim smile touching my lips. "So I had to find a way to leverage that mistake." "What did you say?" Daniel demanded again, his patience wearing thin. "It seems you still haven't understood my meaning." I sighed, feeling a strange detachment. "Let's go back to Thorne. I said he was ruthless, devoid of humanity, but intelligent. Do you know why?" "Why?" "Because he was an even more clear-headed, intelligent, utterly inhuman opportunist. He understood the core nature of transactions better than anyone. You know his childhood story. Kidnapped with his mother. Her family was poor, couldn't pay the ransom. His mother was killed." "Yes," Daniel confirmed, nodding. "Wait. Something feels wrong. If they couldn't get money, why would they kill only the mother and let the child go?" "That," I said, my voice dropping to a chilling whisper, "is precisely the question. The reason they didn't kill the mother and let him go is because the person who killed his mother wasn't the kidnapper. It was Calvin Thorne himself. What? Daniel gasped, horrified. Without money for ransom, the kidnappers wouldn't just release them. No criminal would believe a "I promise I won't tell" assurance. So Thorne, to save his own life, struck a deal. He killed his mother, and the kidnappers documented his crime, a gruesome transaction for his freedom. Both sides held leverage over the other. In fact, Thorne's crime was far more severe, ensuring the kidnappers believed he would never report them. That's how they let him go. Daniel stared at me, speechless, his face pale. Yes, that kind of leverage exists, he stammered. But I never imagined anyone could be so cold-blooded. He truly is a monster. So, did you do something similar? I didn't, I said calmly. There was only Thorne and me. Who could I kill? My only option was to leverage the mistake I had already made. To make a gamble. The mistake? Forgetting to call the police? Daniel asked. I nodded. Yes. When he had his hands around my throat, I used every ounce of my strength to ask him, why didn't I call the police? Then I pointed to the landline phone nearby. Daniel frowned, asking him that. What good would that do? You think he'd believe some story about you wanting to protect him? Of course not, I said, shaking my head. Think about it from his perspective. A person witnesses a murder. They are temporarily safe afterward, have access to a phone. But they don't call the police. What's the likelihood that person is just, like me, mentally unwell, so consumed by the image of the body that they forget about reporting a murder? That probability is indeed very low, Daniel conceded, his journalistic mind analyzing the logic. Exactly, I continued. So I used that mistake, that inexplicable failure to report, to sell him a lie. I told him I didn't call the police because I couldn't call the police. I told him I was a wanted fugitive, that the police were after me. I watched his reaction. I told him that since I had committed crimes just like him, I would never go to the police. We both held leverage over the other. Since we wouldn't expose each other, he had no reason to kill me to silence me. Killing me would only create more problems for him, given that I was already on the police's wanted list. He was temporarily safe. He didn't need to get further entangled with me. I see, Daniel murmured, still processing the cold calculus of it all. But unlike his situation, you had no proof. You just said it. How could he possibly believe you were a fugitive? Just because you didn't call the police wasn't enough, was it? He didn't have to believe it completely, I said, my voice flat. The potential benefits of sparing me outweighed the risks. After seeing the body, I turned off the lights to make the apartment look empty, and I didn't turn them back on while I was painting. When he came in, his face was covered. I couldn't identify him. Back then, without modern forensics, identification often relied on witnesses. Couldn't describe him. All he really needed to do was tie me up or knock me out and leave. But that still carried risk. I gambled, Daniel. I gambled on his opportunism, on his understanding of mutual leverage. And I was right. I paused, a faint, unsettling smile touching my lips. He not only spared me, he even told me about his own kidnapping experience. I felt like he saw a kindred spirit. Daniel's expression was odd. A mix of confusion and revulsion. Kindred spirits. You and Calvin Thorne. Kindred spirits. Yes, I said, a dry chuckle escaping me. Yes. I feel something's wrong, Daniel said suddenly, his eyes darting around the room, a flicker of unease. Wait. Let me think. He closed his eyes tightly for a moment. Feel not well. It started about half an hour ago. You look uncomfortable, I commented, watching him carefully. I am, Daniel confirmed, his voice strained. I feel weak. Dizzy. How could this be? His eyes snapped open, wide fixed. On me, his gaze filled with dawning horror. The water glass on the table between us was knocked over, scattering across the floor. It's just some sedative and hypnotic medication, I said calmly, reaching for a length of rope I had placed nearby. My usual prescription. I've built up a tolerance. It affects you more, I suppose. What are you doing? Daniel fought against the sudden drowsiness, pushing himself up from the table, only to stumble and fall to the floor. I'm reminding you of what you missed, I said, getting up, walking over to him and kneeling beside him. The prophecy. I held the rope, testing Its strength. I am a wanted fugitive. That was the prophecy, Daniel. Spanning nearly 20 years, what I said that night is about to come true. Why? Daniel's eyes were wide with terror, fixed on the rope. I slowly, deliberately looped the rope around his neck. Meeting Calvin Thorne for most people would be a tragedy, a nightmare. But for me, it was a gift. God's gift to someone like me. Someone without talent. The rope crossed at the back of his neck. Daniel struggled, trying to crawl towards the door. He showed me that I wasn't truly without talent. My artistic switch. It's just wired differently. The rope began to tighten. My best work, my debut piece, Goddess, painted that New Year's Eve. It depicts the woman from upstairs hanging down, her body limp. I took that painting to the art professor. He was genuinely moved. He looked at it and exclaimed, "It's love." He saw passion. And he waived my tuition fees. The rope tightened further, bringing the terrifying sensation of suffocation. But after that, I could never paint anything good again. I kept trying to recapture the psychological state I was in when I painted Goddess. The tension, the thrill, the exhilaration, the singular focus. I thought, if I could just return to that state, I could paint again. My voice was calm, conversational, even as the rope dug into Daniel's flesh. For years I tried everything. Drinking, reckless driving, even drugs. I pushed my mind, my body to the breaking point. But no matter how much I tormented myself, I couldn't replicate that state. All the failed attempts over the years. They proved it to me. Only death, only witnessing human death, can unlock my talent. The rope continued to constrict. Daniel writhed in agony, his upper body arching backward, his hand reaching upwards, grasping for an unseen savior. "Yes," I said, a note of approval in my voice. "Excellent. That pose. Keep that pose for a moment." Meeting Thorne that night, witnessing his victim. That was a stroke of luck. I created Goddess. What are the odds of encountering a serial killer, let alone witnessing the specific person he killed? It was a rare event. Unrepeatable. One such instance in a lifetime is enough. To want more, you have to take it yourself. You have to actively seek it. The rope bit deeper. For years, I endured the agony of mediocrity. I also suppressed the urge to kill. The former finally won. Thorne's capture. It showed me I couldn't wait anymore. I couldn't rely on chance or others. I had to do it myself. I had to create human death. The rope was now deeply embedded in his skin. I know that once I act, I am lost. My professional life as I know it will end. But it will end in fulfillment. A complete ending is more meaningful than a long, pointless existence of mediocrity. It was too painful. Could not accept that the woman who painted Goddess would remain ordinary forever. I couldn't bear it. For 18 years I've been a living dead person, an empty shell. To avoid killing, I endured living like that for 18 years. Now I can finally paint the sequel to Goddess. God has sent the Goddess's son to me. You pursued me for over a month, Daniel. I refused you countless times, but you wouldn't give up. It was destiny. My voice was almost reverent. I should not resist it any longer. My intuition tells me that the woman in the painting and you are mother and son. You will go to heaven to reunite with your mother. That will be your fulfillment. And your sacrifice will be my fulfillment. A happy ending for everyone. That, I said calmly, looking at the two figures frozen in my mind's eye, the mother reaching down, the son reaching up, is my confession. That is the complete story. An hour earlier, the police had arrived at my secluded studio, located in the west wing of the Art Academy. They found one person, one body, and two paintings. One was titled Goddess, now renamed Mother. The other was Son. Mother depicted a woman leaning downwards, her hand reaching out with protective love. Son depicted a child who had fallen, his upper body arched backward, his hand reaching upwards, yearning for his mother's protection. Both figures faced outwards towards the viewer, displayed side by side with mother above son. The two figures' gazes, previously looking blankly ahead, now met, finding their focus. They were complete. These two paintings. What story do they tell? A police officer asked, his voice measured, professional. The mother boards a train leaving home. She leans out the window, reaching downwards, wanting one last touch of comfort for her child. The child chases after the train, but falls to the ground, reaching out in vain towards his mother as she pulls away. It's Daniel Sterling's story, the officer noted, looking from the paintings to me, his expression unreadable. All right. Let's go. The police prepared to escort me to the station. At the door, the officer paused, seemingly unable to let go of one lingering question. So, were they really mother and son? At this moment, I said, choosing my words carefully, allowing for plausible deniability, I can only say, based on my intuition, I believe they were. But, for complete artistic and emotional fulfillment, and for scientific confirmation, I would need DNA evidence. That would require your help, officer. The officer shook his head. We can't do that. The woman you described dead on New Year's Eve. There's no record of her. No body was ever found. It's possible. It was just a hallucination. Oh, she was very real. I said, my voice soft absolute. That night on the balcony, I reached out my hand wanting to catch the snow. Instead, 2 drops of her blood fell into my palm. That was the beginning of the story. And perhaps, it is also the ending. I gestured towards the painting, Mother. Those 2 drops of blood. They are on that painting. Please, officer. Take it. Get it tested. The inn.